Hash the Dark Wanderer. The wind swept across the barren hills like a whispered warning. Sarah Mitchell pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she watched from her kitchen window. The small farming village of Millhaven had seen many travelers pass through over the years, but none quite like the figure approaching on the dusty road. He moved slowly, deliberately. A tall man wrapped in a dark cloak that seemed to drink in the fading afternoon light. Even from a distance, Sarah could sense something different about this stranger. Something that made her heart beat a little faster. Her husband Thomas was out in the fields, harvesting the last of the autumn corn with their neighbors. The children were playing in the yard next door. Everything was normal, peaceful. Yet the sight of this lone traveler filled her with an unexplained unease. The stranger paused at the crossroads just outside town. Sarah watched as he stood perfectly still, as if listening to something only he could hear. His hood was pulled low, casting his face in shadow. For a long moment, he remained motionless. Then, slowly, he turned his head toward the village. Even though she knew he couldn't possibly see her through the window at this distance, Sarah stepped back. There was something unsettling about the way he held himself. Something ancient and weary that seemed to weigh down his shoulders like an invisible burden. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, the stranger finally moved again. He walked down the main street with measured steps, his boots making no sound on the packed earth. One by one, the villagers noticed him. Conversations stopped. Children were called inside. Shutters closed with quiet clicks. Sarah found herself drawn back to the window. The stranger had stopped in front of the old well in the center of town. He stood there like a dark sentinel, unmoving. Waiting. Thomas returned home just as the last light was fading from the sky. His face was flushed from the day's work, and he carried the smell of fresh earth and corn silk. But his usual cheerful expression faded when he saw his wife's worried face. "There's a stranger in town," Sarah said quietly. "He's been standing by the well for over an hour." Thomas peered out the window. The figure was still there, a darker shadow against the growing dusk. "Maybe he's just resting. Travelers need water." But something in Thomas's voice suggested he felt the same unease his wife did. They ate their dinner in unusual silence, both stealing glances toward the window. The stranger never moved. As night fell, Sarah lit the oil lamps with trembling hands. The warm yellow light should have been comforting, but tonight it felt fragile against the darkness outside. Thomas checked the doors twice, making sure they were securely latched. "I'm going to talk to him," Thomas said suddenly. "No." Sarah's response was immediate and firm. "Please, Thomas. Something isn't right about him." Her husband looked at her with surprise. Sarah was not one to be frightened easily. She had faced harsh winters, crop failures, and even helped deliver babies during difficult births. But now she looked genuinely afraid. "What if he needs help?" Thomas asked gently. Sarah shook her head. "That man doesn't need help from anyone. I can feel it." They went to bed early, but neither slept well. Every small sound seemed amplified in the quiet house. The creak of settling wood. The rustle of wind through the last autumn leaves. And underneath it all, an oppressive silence from the direction of the town well. Morning came gray and cold. Sarah rose before dawn and crept to the kitchen window. Her breath caught in her throat. The stranger was gone. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by guilt. Perhaps they should have offered hospitality to a weary traveler. Perhaps her fears had been foolish. But as she prepared breakfast, Sarah noticed something that made her hands still on the coffee pot. The well rope was moving slightly, as if someone had recently drawn water. Yet she had heard no sound during the night. Thomas joined her in the kitchen, and together they walked outside. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of wood smoke from neighboring chimneys. Everything looked normal, peaceful, except for the footprints. They were pressed deep into the soft earth around the well. Not the prints of ordinary boots, but something older. More worn. The marks of someone who had walked many miles across many years. "He was here all night," Thomas said quietly. Sarah nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. But as she looked closer at the tracks, she noticed something that made her frown. The footprints didn't lead away from the well in any direction. They simply stopped, as if the man had vanished into thin air. Over the following days, life in Millhaven slowly returned to normal. The harvest was completed successfully. The autumn festival was planned. Children returned to their games. But Sarah found herself thinking often about the dark stranger. Then old Martha Collins mentioned something that made Sarah's blood run cold. "My grandmother used to tell stories," Martha said as they worked together in the general store. "About a wanderer who appeared during times of great change. Always before something important happened to our village." "What kind of changes?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Martha's weathered face grew thoughtful. "Good changes, mostly. The year before the railroad came through, bringing prosperity. The year before Young Drive. Henderson arrived to stay. The year before the Johnson family discovered that spring on their property." Sarah felt her fears slowly transform into curiosity. You think he was, what? Some kind of good omen? Maybe, Martha said. Or maybe just a man who could sense when a place was ready for something new. That evening, Sarah shared this conversation with Thomas. They sat by their fire, holding cups of warm cider, watching the flames dance in the hearth. Do you think something's about to change for us? Thomas asked. Before Sarah could answer, they heard the sound of horses approaching. Visitors were rare in the evening, and Sarah felt her old anxiety return. But when Thomas opened the door, they found a young couple with travel-stained clothes and hopeful faces. Please, the woman said. We're looking for a place to settle. To start a new life. Someone told us this was a good town for new beginnings. Sarah and Thomas exchanged glances. Then Sarah stepped forward with a warm smile. Come in, she said. We'll help you however we can. As they welcomed the strangers into their home, Sarah thought about the dark figure who had stood so silently by their well. Perhaps some mysteries were meant to remain unsolved. Perhaps some strangers brought gifts that could only be understood in time. Outside, the wind carried the scent of coming winter and the promise of spring beyond.